The thing was that he'd agreed. He and his group had agreed um, for me to film a conversation for that particular festival conference, not a documentary. And when I went back to him and his group to get permission to get rights, they said no. So this was my crisis film. Now Errol and I have one thing in common, which is we never see anything we appear in. So this was a fundamental problem, right? In order to support the film, he had to see it, but he never sees anything he appears in. I mean, here was a film that obviously, was you would say his triumph, but or certainly it is the turning point in his work in his career, and yet it was dismissed by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Science.
Chciałem zapytać, Charlie, na początek, kim dla ciebie właściwie jest Errol Morris? Dlaczego zrobiłeś ten film? Mówi się w tym filmie o tym, że przyszedłeś do niego z jakimś Jimem, nie wiem kim jest Jim, żeby napisać książkę o cienkiej niebieskiej linii. Chyba jej nie napisałeś nigdy, bo nie znam tej książki, ale to był początek waszego kontaktu. No więc jak to jest?
Yes, I had sort of begun to lose interest in documentary. It seemed to me it was stuck. And then, as with you, I saw the Thin Blue Line. And there was a particular turning point for me where I basically finished, I published 3 books on early cinema. And the question was what to do next. One possibility was to just move forward and keep on writing the history of American cinema. But really, at that moment, seeing the Thin Blue Line reaffirmed my commitment to documentary. And so it was really important to me. And Jim is James Seamus, who ran Good Machine, this kind of independent distribution company. He was Ang Lee's writer, screenwriter. He and I, were at one point sort of best friends and continue to be best friends, but we both competed for the same job at Columbia. And James got it, and I did not. They wanted to hire both of us, but they just ended up hiring James. So yeah, and the person who told me that Errol Morris hated A Brief History of Time was James as well. We photocopied all of this material. I had I organized a conference on documentary, and in particular a panel on the Thin Blue Line. One of the people who wrote on that was Linda Williams, and her essay on the Thin Blue Line got published before mine, but I think it's an excellent essay, although we do have some disagreements. That things might have ended there. I mean, I might have just been a kind of admirer of Errol Morris from afar. But as fate would have it, I was co-teaching a course on documentary film and photography, and one of our students wrote about the Abu Ghraib photographs, and she took that paper to Errol, and that became the basis for a standard operating procedure. So that's Amanda. Her sister was the assistant, was Errol's assistant in this, Amanda Gill. And so Amanda was up there, so my former student was up there working with Errol, and this was a way to reconnect with him. And then I decided that I would teach a course on Errol Morris and his documentaries, and rather than sort of concoct my own syllabus, I decided I would teach his syllabus. So it was like, Errol, what films of Fred Wiseman should we show? Because he was a Fred Wiseman fan. What essays should students read? So actually, I went up to his to Cambridge and met with him to go over the syllabus. It was like, Yeah, he'd like to do that, but we don't know when he'll have time. And then, like at like 1:30, his assistant called up. Well, if you can get up today, by 4 o'clock, he could talk to you about the syllabus. And so I went up and did that. So I actually had seen his offices, the global department store offices, fourth floor productions, before this film, before I went up to shoot the film. But also part of the deal would be that he would come down and show my students a cut of standard operating procedure. Well, that didn't happen, but I was able to bring my students up to really the last work in progress screening of standard operating procedure. And then he met with my students for an hour and among other things said, this is my greatest work. This film is really my masterpiece. So he was very enthusiastic about the film. He had all sorts of ideas about why this film was important as opposed to other films about Abu Ghraib. And then when Standard Operating Procedure was released, critics, documentary scholars went after this film and after him in a very vicious way. And it was devastating for him, as I think he suggests in the film. And I felt it was really unfair, and I wanted to find a way. I just didn't think that people they stopped listening to him, they stopped seeing the film. It was really, in a way, payback, I think, for the success of Fog of War, that he didn't, as I suggested, well, you could have, tacked McNamara, the unrequited war criminal, against the wall and shown what a terrible, war criminal he was, and he wouldn't admit. That's what people wanted him to do, and they made him pay, I think, with the reception of Standard Operating Procedure. Not quite a friend, but a colleague of mine, Paul Arthur, wrote this attack on the film and then died. And so it was like his last will and testament. And so all my other fellow colleagues of documentary felt they had to jump on the Paul Arthur bandwagon. I mean, it was really unpleasant. So I decided that I would have a conference and a set of screenings, very much like this, and that I would get Errol Morris down, and then I would get not the worst of his critics, but some of the people who had been critical of the film and of him, to have a kind of conversation and sort of thrash this out. This was my idea. And then, of course, what happened was that he said, I might not be able to come down. So I had envisioned filming all of that. And so then we had the backup plan, and, you saw the result of the backup plan. So I realized this is the first time I've shown this film, which in an earlier iteration was the same kind of event. So it's like a kind of poignant repetition for me. Thank you. So, I finished the film. Now, the thing was that he'd agreed. He and his group had agreed for me to film a conversation for that particular festival conference, not a documentary. And when I went back to him and his group to get permission to get rights, they said no. So this was my crisis, and I felt like I had one chance to change their minds. I throw it out to you, if anyone, I'll throw it out to you as a filmmaker. So I had one chance to get them to change their mind. What did I propose? How did I do it?
Well, please.
I said, I would like to donate $1,000 to the Karen Schmier Fund in your name, $250 a piece, in exchange for you giving me permission to do this film.
Well, I wouldn't guess that.
And they, of course, said yes. They couldn't say no. I mean, it was like, So, and then later on, they said, well, you don't really have to donate $1,000. And I said, I'm definitely donating $1,000. I'm not going back on my proposal. So then, the film was finished, and they showed it in a couple of film festivals, and Errol wondered, if he might help with the film and its distribution. And, but in order to help, he felt he had to see the film. Now, Errol and I have one thing in common, which is we never see anything we appear in. So this was a fundamental problem, right? In order to support the film, he had to see it, but he never sees anything he appears in. So I then had a stupid idea, as the donation to the Karen Schmier Fund was smart, I guess. I said, oh, well, your wife is an art historian. Surely she will appreciate this film. She'll understand, that it's this revealing, loving portrait of this artist. So she saw the film and was horrified. She felt it was way too revealing, in a way a backhanded compliment, way too revealing of Errol. And all she remembered is like this deep depression he'd been in when people attacked him. So she was totally, wanted to protect him in every way possible. And so, she said, no, don't have anyone see this film. And so, Errol came back and, told me this, and he was upset, I was upset, and but fortunately enough, people had seen the film, particularly some filmmakers who he knew and respected, and they said how much they loved the film, how much they felt that they understood his work better, and they were very appreciative. So I was able to forward those emails to him, and so he didn't sort of try and block the film. But he also didn't try and help me promote it. But anyway, I mean, for better or worse, his wife feels the film is too revealing of her husband. So that's something. So, there's this James Cain who says that, there's something about murder that, when you two people are engaged in murder, they it's not like they can get off the trolley at separate stops. They have to go all the way to the graveyard at the end. And I think about this in terms of sometimes being a filmmaker with a subject that I've worked with. Not only Errol, I have not made a lot of films, but Errol's certainly one of them. And we're still on the trolley car together. I occasionally send him emails. I'll send him an article or a book, or he'll send me a book. And if I go to Boston, I'll see if he happens to be in town. So I don't want to exaggerate the intimacy of our relationship. But on the other hand, I think that, if I send him an email, I generally get a response. I send him an email after seeing.
Czy napiszesz do niego maila po powrocie o naszym wydarzeniu?
I will. I think what I'll first do is, and I often do this, maybe I'll write to his assistant. Just out of respect for, find out. I want to ask how he's doing. First of all, I think I'll ask how he's doing. I'll tell him, yes, about being here, for sure.
Czy ja dobrze rozumiem, że nakręciłeś ten film w pewnym sensie w obronie Errola Morrisa na skutek tych jego ataków przeciwko niemu po Standard Operating Procedure?
Right. Yes. Absolutely. I mean, the culmination of this film is Standard Operating Procedure, and him explicating what was going on with that film. Was I think the culminating moment of the goal, and I learned a lot about the film. And of course, one thing that was interesting is his explanation and his explanation about the film and what it does was totally different than what he said to my students just before he locked the picture. So the context had changed, and he'd been thinking about it in very different terms.
Taki paradoks. Errol Morris jest jednym z najwyżej cenionych, najbardziej cenionych dokumentalistów amerykańskich, ale z tego materiału i z tego, co on mówi, można by wnioskować, że właściwie jest przez cały czas krytykowany. On się czuje właśnie niezrozumiany, atakowany. Więc jak to jest?
Yeah, I mean, I think people bring a lot to the table. You know, as he says, he makes political movies, but quote political movies, but they're not political the way people think. So, you know, he was attacked very seriously for the Bannon film. That was perhaps his most recent film that was really savagely attacked. You know, other films that I think are very important to him, like The B-Side, the photography of Elsa Dorfman. I noticed that this is one of the things I learned by being here, was that I was looking at the end credits both for Fog of War and Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control, and Elsa Dorfman appears in the credits of both those films. Mm-hmm. So this is a woman, a photographer that he has a long history with. And I only, you know, I saw the evidence of that. I mean, I knew it sort of, but I saw the concrete evidence of that here this time. So that was great. I mean, we have to go back. We can go back to the Thin Blue Line, the film that inspired both of us, which the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Science, the documentary division of the Academy, refused to recognize the Thin Blue Line as a documentary. So, you know, I mean, here was a film that obviously, you know, was you would say his triumph, but or his, certainly it is the turning point in his work and his career, and yet it was dismissed by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. So you can see, you know, I mean, he has constantly gotten this kind of pushback on his films.
Proszę Państwa, ja mam rozmaite pytania jeszcze, ale nie chciałbym dominować tej dyskusji, także zachęcam Państwa do udziału.
Bardzo dziękuję za ten ciekawy film, który skłania nas na pewno do obejrzenia jeszcze większej ilości filmów Errola Morrisa. Wspomniał Pan na początku, że to, co Was łączy, to, że oboje chcieliście zorganizować bardzo podobny pokaz filmów Errola Morrisa i zaprosiliście Errola Morrisa i on w obu przypadkach odmówił. I chciałabym zapytać, czy Pana zdaniem to jest kwestia po prostu tego, że jest bardzo zapracowany i nie ma czasu, czy robi to niejako celowo, unika celowo udziału w tego typu wydarzeniach związanych z jego osobą, z jego twórczością? Dziękuję.
You know, I think you always have to you have to always understand that so many people want a piece of Errol Morris, right? That, you know, to ask him is even something I hesitate to do. I mean, it's interesting that people who know him less well than me, you know, like in the School of Art, will somehow invite him down to give a talk at Yale and show a film. And I, you know, knowing how busy he is, I always hesitate to do that. So, I mean, the reason he didn't come down in my case was, you know, because, you know, he had this commercial to do out on the West Coast. I mean, he was ready to. And again, the reason he even agreed to what we got was because it was the backup plan. So, you know, so the backup plan was like acknowledging that that everyone wants a piece of him and someone can pay a lot of money for that piece, and he actually needs that money to keep his office going. So I don't think he travels too far. He goes to New York for Doc NYC or the New York Film Festival. You know, you have to think, like, let's say he were to come here for a weekend or do what I did instead, right? You got him. You know, his office probably costs, well, let's say $3,000 a day. I don't know, maybe it's $2,000 a day, maybe it's $4,000, I don't know. But, you know, so if he's not working, if he's coming here, you know, besides all the other problems of jet lag and stuff like this, and, you know, he's not a young guy anymore, right? In fact, as we found out, he was in the hospital, so he could not have come here in any case, right? Even if he'd agreed, he would have had to say, no, I'm in the hospital. But he really, you know, he's not like us, an academic who gets paid something, you know, and you know, we have an infrastructure that is sort of there in place for us. I mean, he is you know, in effect, a small businessman, and he's also not a very efficient businessman, right? I mean, really these films take a long time for him to make. At the Pigeon Tunnel, there was someone in the room who said, I was on this film that you shot, with 12 cameras. I was like the person who was setting them up. I was like the camera assistant. And, it was about chaos with this person. And he said, well, what's happened to that film? He said, well, I shot all that film, and then the guy had an idea that they were going to, turn it into a big fiction film, and so I couldn't finish that film. And he said, but then the fiction film fell apart, and now maybe I'm making the film. So I mean, there's these unfinished projects, which is the assistant refers to. I think one has to really appreciate the difficult situation these people are in.
A czy nie jest tak, że on też nie lubi się pokazywać publicznie? Czy dużo filmów powstało o Errolu Morrisie, czy twój jest jedyny?
Errol loves to show up and do a Q&A. At least he did with the Pigeon Tunnel, and he shows up at the premieres. And there's lots of interviews that he's done. He and Herzog used to be a kind of Mutt and Jeff team, a Laurel and Hardy team. They go and they do their shtick on truth and the nature of truth. I mean, I think that as he's gotten older, I think maybe feels he needs to preserve his energy, and he needs to focus on his projects. I mean, some of that was, while he still had writer's block. So one way in which he could communicate his ideas when he had writer's block was by talking and being interviewed, right? So he did a lot of it, and in all sorts of different circumstances. But now he no longer has writer's block, and so he's busy. Has a lot of writing projects as well as a lot of film projects, not to mention the commercials. So I mean, he really is. But I think particularly when there's with Bannon, I mean, he was, constantly trying to defend the film. He refused to accept the criticism of the film. With the Pigeon Tunnel, I mean, he was really delighted that people loved the film because he loved the film and loved talking about it. So, I think one just has to, recognize his, the particular nature of his situation. I mean, I don't know when the last time Errol came to Europe. I mean, it's like basically, taking the red eye. It's stressful. I was lucky this time. I had 4 seats, so I could actually lie down and sleep my way over. But the last few times, I've been seated and not really been able to sleep. So I think you need to conspire. So what would it take to get Errol at this point over to Europe, assuming that after this heart operation he's doing okay? I think you need to get him something like the Silver Bear at the Berlin Film Festival, and while he's over at Berlin, bring him over here, right? So get him over to Berlin for something he can't say no to, maybe a Nobel Peace Prize, and then sort of set up as part of this this small tour. But I really wonder if he's really doing these kinds of travels. But I don't mean to say I'm a significant cog in his world. But I mean, people say, oh yeah, we'd like to get him to China. Oh, the reason, in fact, the Big Sky Film Festival ended up premiering my film was because they wanted Errol to come to the Big Sky Film Festival in Montana. I mean, everyone, wants has this great idea, and it's just I think increasingly difficult. He was born in 1948, right? So he's what does that do? 76. He's I mean, that's young for, I insist.
Dziękując bardzo za pański film, chciałam dopytać, o zespół pracowników Errola Morrisa, który w tym filmie jawi się oczywiście jako niezwykle kompetentny, jak się domyślamy, profesjonalny, ale przede wszystkim ja odniosłam wrażenie, że ci ludzie są niezwykle oddani temu właśnie reżyserowi, że są zaangażowani tak bardzo osobiście, nie tylko zawodowo. I chciałam właśnie poprosić o komentarz, jakie pan właśnie odniósł wrażenie. A drugie pytanie wiąże się z tym, bo to oddanie niejako wiąże się nawet z tym, że pracują w pokoju wypełnionym wypchanymi sowami i innymi zwierzętami. Skąd ta obsesja, czy nie wiem jak to nazwać, reżysera, że właśnie ma te wypchane zwierzęta łącznie z głową konia? To jest może naiwne pytanie, ale ciekawi mnie to bardzo. Dziękuję.
Yeah. Well, that's a few questions. Let me see if I can. But Errol is a surrealist, right? And the stuffed animals are. I think he bought them at some place in Paris that was very connected with surrealism and Nadia. So I think you have to understand his fascination. I think of him as a surrealist filmmaker in some way. That's how I would handle with the stuffed animals. In terms of his team, this is like complicated because Errol is known to be really difficult, right? I mean, I feel I'm not complaining here, but we both had to negotiate. It's not always been easy, right? And I don't work for him, so you look at these like fast, cheap, and out of control, right? There's like 3 editors on the main credits in front. Karen Schmier's just one. Actually, I really think this is her film. And then there's a couple of other editors on the backside. I mean, so these were people who were hired and fired, right? So, and Karen Schmier was fired on standard operating procedure. They had a falling out. They had a fight, and it was they did have a meal before she was killed in this hit and run accident, but it was not fully repaired. It wasn't even clear if it could be fully repaired. So there's this kind of chaos in that Errol's, because he's constantly like as he says with Fog of War. There wasn't something quite right with the film, right? So, okay, there goes that editor, bring in the next editor. No, and then he brings in his closer. So it's hard working for him. And then what's I think interesting is there's Anne Patron. And Anne is like his sounding board. She was there, she's his rock. And then Anne died. And then Steve Hathaway became his rock. So that was really a little unexpected because he was an editor, right? But now Steve, if you look at the Pigeon Tunnel, he's his producer, editor. I mean, he's there. He's now been with Errol, for over, I don't know, well over a dozen years. And whenever I go to, I've gone to a few of his premieres in New York, and Steve is always there, right? So I mean, that's. So there's this kind of tension and contradiction.
Moje pytanie będzie dosyć osobiste. Nie musi pan odpowiadać. Czy trudność, tak, charakteru i współpracy pana Errola nie wynikała przypadkiem, pan go zna osobiście, z braku integracji własnego cienia, tak, bo my mamy jasną stronę i ciemną stronę, tak? I ta ciemniejsza strona wcale nie jest tą złą stroną tego niegrzecznego dziecka, tak? Z którym się nie mógł zintegrować. Dlatego potrzebował opoki, tak? Dlatego potrzebował tego wsparcia. Ja tak to czuję, tak? Mogę się mylić, ale ja tak duszą tym, co widzę, tak? To tak czuję.
I remember I said to him, like, I can't pronounce anosognosia. Like I had the worst time. And he said, well, I said, you know, like I'm so impressed by your ability to say anosognosia. He said, well, like I stood in front of a mirror for half an hour and said it until I could say it. This isn't really a direct response, but you know, my rationale about this film is, you know, I did have a long history with him, and we agreed that this would be a kind of backup plan. And he felt so guilty that he could not go down to this festival I'd organized, that he really could not say no that day. I mean, and also I think he really worked very hard to give me, you know, something of substance. And there were certain moments where we negotiated things, right? Like when I said, well, you know, it's my understanding that you really hate A Brief History of Time, his favorite film, you know, and we had to work through that, like in front of the camera. But, you know, so, I mean, if I'd just been like an ordinary person in there filming an interview, I think he would have spent less time on that, but also we never would have been able to film him interviewing the person for the New York Times. Yeah, I mean, Anne Petrone probably would have just refused to appear in front of the camera, but she too was feeling guilty for Errol. So it was really, you know, my pitch for this is just that there was a particular set of circumstances that made this film what it is, you know, and you know, I'm well aware of its limitations, but I also think that maybe, you know, there's other films that have been made about Errol, but I think that this one may be the one that, you know, that people will return to. You know, it's not for me to say, but anyway, you know, I was very happy that Marek seemed to think it was worth bringing me over to show.
Bym zapytać o przyszłość i przeszłość, więc zacznę od przyszłości. Była mowa o licznych projektach, nad którymi pracuję, na których się koncentruję. Czy jest jakiś taki jeden, któremu chciałby poświęcić się Morris w najbliższym czasie? Może właśnie jest już jakiś temat filmu. Jeśli pan wie, to chętnie byśmy posłuchali na ten temat. A druga kwestia wiąże się z fikcją w filmach Morrisa. Tutaj na pierwszej debacie po filmie Cienka niebieska linia napomknęliśmy tylko o tym, że Morris na początku lat 90. zrealizował jeden film fabularny, o którym bardzo mało wiemy. I on powstał, zdaje się, w tym samym roku, w którym został zrealizowany film o Hawkingu, więc też jestem ciekaw, czy coś pan wie na temat tego filmu. Jaki jest stosunek Morrisa do tego dzieła? Czy on planował pójść w fikcję jeszcze głębiej, czy właśnie to był jeden taki epizod?
He has at times talked about doing another fiction film and been quite excited. And then, I mean, I don't mean to say that, you know, we sit down and have hour-long dinner conversations, but you know, in passing, that didn't come up. What came up was this unfinished film about this guy talks about chaos that Errol seems to be working on now. So I really don't know, you know, he said he's working on a book about the interview. He's very, you know, if Errol is constantly trying to reinvent the interview in his films. You know, some people tend to think that the interrotron is like the ultimate expression of the interview as far as Errol is concerned, and that's totally wrong, right? I mean, the Pigeon Tunnel did not use the interrotron. The B-side, the photography of Elsa Dorfman, was basically a cinema verite film. So he's constantly, and even in the films that use the interrotron, he's shooting them and cutting them in different ways. And the fiction film, you know, is not a very good fiction film. And, you know, there's a whole series of documentary filmmakers who have tried to make fiction films. Barbara Koppel did it, you know, and it's just. I'm not saying that they couldn't do it if they could make you know, a number of them, right? But I think it's you know, it's a trick. Have you seen Fred Wiseman's fiction film that he made, supposedly? Yeah. No, I mean, so, you know, you could certainly have a festival of solo fiction films by documentary filmmakers, but I'm not sure that that would pay off.
I have only seen a couple of films of Errol, like 3 or 4 that we could see here. But what I found interesting, what he mentioned, is that people still expect of him to push his interviewers to the wall, and I have never seen him actually do it. So it's surprising because I have seen the Bonnet film and the Fog of War, and in both of these movies, he actually gives us the room for interpretation, which is incredible, and I think it's the best thing that a filmmaker can do, especially if it's a documentary, yeah, so that you have the facts or the perspective of the person, and then you do with it whatever you want to do, and it's not like, oh, this is it, and this is the only thing, you have to believe that. And he mentioned that, like, after he made these movies, people still actually expect of him to push these people, which is weird to think when you consider the fact that he doesn't really do it. So, like, maybe the question is, where does the expectation come from if you know that he doesn't do it and he has maybe never done it? I don't know. But, like, why would people still expect him to do it if this is not the way he works?
So in a film like The Thin Blue Line, you know, the process of the search for truth is certainly an important part of the film. But I think Errol would certainly say that with that film, he got to the truth, right? That Randall Adams, who was convicted of murdering this police officer, that was the state truth. And the consequence of that state truth was that he was going to be executed. Errol Morris showed that that state truth is a lie, and not only is that state truth a lie, but he identified the actual killer, and that actual killer, by letting that guy go free, was left free to kill again. So this is the cost of a lie, of a false truth, right? Now, many of his films, though, don't follow that model. So you're absolutely right that he's interested in investigating who is Robert McNamara, right? Who is John le Carré? And, you know, I don't think it's an exploration, it's a search for truth, but it doesn't necessarily end with him saying, oh, Robert McNamara is this. I mean, you know, we certainly get a sense that, you know, here's this man who, you know, thought that the rationality would save us, he says. So, you know, I don't think that, you know, Errol's obsessed by truth, right? That's what that's the first thing he said with the Pigeon Tunnel, is documentaries about the search for truth. End of statement.
Delikatną refleksję, nie wiem, czy mnie słychać mnie, że tak tutaj czytam. Ja nie znam chyba ani jednego filmu tego reżysera, ale obejrzę sobie teraz. Do tego zostałam zaproszona dzisiaj. Ale przychodzi mi na myśl jedno. Tutaj pisze, że on jako malutki chłopczyk zmarł mu ojciec, lekarz, na serce. Więc liczę na to, że on teraz do ojca swojego się zbliżył, tak? I do zawodu, bo obrabiają go lekarze z zawodu jego ojca. I zachorował na serce, czyli na to, z czym połączył się ze swoim ojcem. I teraz ciekawa jestem skutku tego wszystkiego, jak już zostanie, powiedzmy, podleczony, co u niego się zmieni, bo to jest zastanawiające, te atrapy tych zwierząt. One są może piękne, ja też mogłabym być w środku wypchana. Ale tak naprawdę moje narządy nie będą spełniały swojej roli i ja nie będę w pełni żyjącą osobą. Będę tylko atrapą z zewnątrz. I czasami może łatwiej jest tak patrzeć na kogoś połowicznie, jako obiekt, nie łącząc się z tym, co jest wewnątrz. A to, że on pozostawia pewną taką rezerwę, żeby każdy się zastanowił, jak interpretować daną osobę, to właśnie bardzo dobrze, bo nigdy nie znamy tych okoliczności, a ludzie potrzebują krwi, czyli jego wystawiają na kogoś, kto miałby odnieść się, powiedzmy, do tego, czy ktoś coś zrobił, nie zrobił, żeby mieć takiego, powiedzmy, winnego. A to nie jest takie proste, żeby coś wypowiedzieć się na dany temat, a później wszyscy klakierzy to przyjmą jako pewnik. A tak naprawdę wiele okoliczności za tym przemawia, żeby w jakikolwiek sposób istotnie i albo na lewo, albo na prawo się wypowiedzieć. Reasumując, jeżeli on jest takim człowiekiem, z którym komunikacja jest utrudniona, to ewidentnie ma ranę odrzucenia ze strony ojca, a to jest praca. Ja tak uważam. I to ta rana za nim ciągle przemawia.
Well, you raise interesting questions. You know, in The Pigeon Tunnel, this film I keep on coming back to, John le Carré says that his mother was a non-factor in his life. His mother had to escape his father, who, when he was 4, she left. He says, my mother was a non-factor in my life, and for better or worse, and he has really problematic feelings about his father. He feels like he's totally indebted to his father, that he in some way is an extension of his father, which does not necessarily make him happy. It's part of John le Carré's tortured life. Errol's is the same way. His father died when he was 2, right? So his father was a non-factor, while his mother was a music teacher, right, and a pianist. And, you know, as you see, I mean, Errol hangs on to the cello, which I think is very much his mother. Now, his father died when his father was young. Now, Errol had a brother, and the brother, as you see, died when he was 41. So his brother had the father's gene when it comes to heart. And, you know, Errol, you know, he's 76, and yes, and he's overweight and doesn't take particularly good care of himself, I would suspect. So, I mean, this is what's happened, but it's very different than his father or his brother. I mean, I think I don't want to go. I haven't gone there, and I'm reluctant to go there. But you must. I'm sure that, you know, that his brother, his older brother, who he admired, died at such a young age, is something that haunts him, as well as his father. But I think he understands that he's the, you know, he's the other side of that. He's the counterpart. He's his mother's son, not his father's son.
Proszę Państwa, myślę, że na tym skończymy. Także bardzo dziękuję za przyjazd, za gotowość przyjazdu tutaj, za rozmowy, za tą naszą konwersację. Bardzo dziękuję Państwu za to, że w niedzielę na koniec tygodnia znaleźliście Państwo czas na udział, na rozmowę. Chciałem też podziękować przy okazji całej ekipie, która uczestniczyła w przygotowaniu tego przeglądu, bo to może z zewnątrz nie widać, ale to pół roku wytężonej pracy, co najmniej 6-osobowego, a tak naprawdę kilkunastoosobowego zespołu, więc pozwólcie, że wymienię, nie wszyscy tutaj są, ale Weronika, Rafał, Milena, Krystian, Paweł, moja skromna osoba i do tego nasi fantastyczni praktykanci, którzy między innymi są tutaj, robią relacje. Wszystkie nasze rozmowy będą zamieszczone na kanale Centrum Filmowego na YouTubie. Więc bardzo dziękuję Państwu, bardzo dziękuję profesorowi, bardzo dziękuję współorganizatorom. I oczywiście dziękujemy naszej wspaniałej tłumacce Pauli Gorszczyńskiej.
Dziękuję.